You're listening to People for People Radio, the voice of truth in Scotland.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see everybody today in the chat. This is Luca Majno coming back to you again for another show of Learn to Unlearn. Today we have Christopher Bollyn as a guest, and I am tickled pink on peopleforpeople.ning.com. This is like getting a Lifetime Achievement Award for me. I'm not trying to suck up or anything, just stating a fact. 30 years ago, I simply asked God to just please use me in a good way to have me do my humble part in making this world a better place. And someone told me after that, be careful what you wish for, you may get it. Well, it seems I did get it. And Christopher Bollyn is on our show today. How are you doing today?
Hello, Luca. Good to be with you.
There's not very many people that know as much as you do about 9/11 because of where you lived and because of who you are and what you studied. And it seems that when we get close to the truth and things get hot and we get martyred, and when this happens, we know we're doing something good. Something's right. We're getting somebody upset. We're touching on truth, and we're doing something right for humanity. In your case, it seems like you did everything right. Born and raised in the Chicago area, middle-class family, good family values, a degree in history from UC Santa Cruz. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like more and more normal folk are simply saying, no way. The buck stops here. That's it. Our integrity screams out.
Well, I became an investigative journalist after getting my degree in history. My specialty was Israel and Palestine and the Zionist occupation of Palestine. And I studied that as a degree because I had lived in the Middle East. I had gone to the Middle East after high school and spent several years traveling around, spending a lot of time actually in Israel on a kibbutz, a Zionist communist settlement in the Jordan Valley, one of the oldest ones. And I learned a lot about Zionism, and then I would spend winters in Norway, and I would study more about this conflict. And I realized when I was about 19 years old that this was a very unusual conflict, very unusual. This is not a normal conflict that could be settled with, a peace treaty. This was a conflict of a spiritual sort, of a spiritual nature. Basically a hoax.
Yeah. And speaking of being martyred, another case that's really dear to my heart is the Philip Marshall case. And if you know Frank Gregory Ford, I've done over 100 shows with him on TLB TV, which is the Liberty Beacon Project. And we've talked a lot about the Philip Marshall case and what happened. And we have a quote from you here that I found. It says, quote, Bollyn suggests that Philip Marshall was killed because of his inside knowledge on how the Mossad, the Bush family, and the Clinton family effectively took over the Medellin cartel in the 1980s and set up their own drug trafficking enterprise. Certain people might know a bit more in detail or intimate detail than others. For example, Frank Gregory Ford was telling me when we were doing the show on Philip Marshall that they wanted the 5th manuscript of his book, and he would not give it to them. So what they do is they take the family down in the basement, the 2 children with him, and they tie both of them up, and they torture both of them in front of him before killing them. And then they go to him and ask him a last time, where is the manuscript? Where is that last copy? And he wouldn't give it to them. So they killed him as well. These are the type of people we're dealing with. And it's a really horrible situation. So for you end up moving to Sweden, which was a really good move. And I kept digging, and then I found something else from WikiSpooks, stating in 2016, the ADL, which is the Antidefamation League, which is, by the way, a front for the New World Order, as is the Southern Poverty Law Center, they call you an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist?
Yeah, well, they started calling me names like that back in 2001, actually, because it was when I wrote about the explosives at the World Trade Center, eyewitness evidence of explosions at the World Trade Center. This was in like October of 2001. Then the ADL did a paper or a press release, whatever they call it, and they said that I was writing grist for the anti-Semitic newspaper American Free Press. And so they began right away, and they were protesting a little bit too much, because that article that I had written about explosions at the World Trade Center had nothing to do with Jews or Israel or anything. It was about the eyewitness evidence of explosions in the World Trade Center. It's printed in magazines like People magazine. Right. And because there were a lot of people on day one in the first week who talked about seeing and hearing and feeling explosions. All the reporters on the scene actually did, all of them. But this had to be suppressed. This information had to be suppressed, because if people were talking about explosions in the World Trade Center before the building came down, people would start asking questions. Well, what's this all about? Everybody on every Tom on the street could say that doesn't fit. Why are explosions going off before the buildings come down?
I just wanted to get back to the Antidefamation League for a second. They released a poll. They see only 22% of Americans now believing the movie and television industries are pretty much run by Jews, down by nearly 50% in 1964. Mm-hmm. And the quote from you says that you've never been so upset by a poll in your entire life. And I have to join in on that choir, because I'm really, really surprised myself that there aren't more people involved in trying to figure out 9/11 as there really are. Nobody seems to be doing anything about it. So we have to differentiate between truth and misinfo and disinfo. I think that's probably one of the first and most important things. And, everybody's saying, for example, the government did 9/11. And you're saying that's not true. What's your take on that?
Well, that's a misconception. That's the same kind of misconception. People say that it was an inside job. I mean, that sounds very, very easy to roll off the tongue, inside job. But it's not correct, because people come away with the idea that, like, the U.S. government and U.S. agencies and U.S. politicians and officials pulled off 9/11. And that's not what the evidence shows. The evidence, people say, oh, the military-industrial complex did it, or the CIA did it, or whatever. Right. No, we don't see that. We do see the FBI destroying evidence. That's correct. We do see the Department of Justice running a non-investigation. That's correct. But you have to look at who's behind it. Who's the person who's making the decision? Exactly. Because it's the Department of Justice does nothing. People at the Department of Justice do something. And the person to whom the 9/11 file was given for prosecution and investigation was a man named Michael Chertoff. And Michael Chertoff is an Israeli-American whose mother was one of the first Mossad agents. Her name was Elizabeth Eisen. She was from Elizabeth, New Jersey. Her name was Eisen, Livia Eisen. And she was Mrs. Chertoff. And as I said, she went to Israel as a young woman, and was one of the first Israeli Mossad intelligence agents. And she worked on importing all those Yemenite Jews into Israel in the late 1940s. Right. But Michael Chertoff was in charge of the investigation of 9/11. And Americans have to understand that 9/11 was never investigated as a crime. What happened on day one is the Bush administration declared it to be an act of war. Yes. An act of war is a legal term. It means that one nation has aggressed another and led to a situation of war. But that's not what happened on 9/11. We don't have a nation that we can identify from the official version as being behind this. They blamed 19 Arab hijackers who were associated, they said, with Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden doesn't represent a country. So by calling it an act of war, they precluded having a proper criminal investigation. And that allowed the Department of Justice to turn over the evidence to basically two scrap companies in New Jersey who destroyed the metal, destroyed the steel, destroyed the evidence of the crime scene where 3,000 people were killed.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat. It says, did George Bush do 9/11 to start the war?
No, George W. Bush, I don't know to what degree he was behind anything. His father, George Herbert Walker Bush, the Papa Bush, was on board with the War on Terror. The War on Terror, the concept of waging a war on terror, was rolled out in Jerusalem at the Netanyahu conference under the auspices of Menachem Begin in 1979. And it was a 3-day conference in July 1979, and George Herbert Walker Bush spoke at the final session, basically supporting the idea of, preemptive wars against Zionist elements, terrorist elements in the Middle East and the countries that host them. Yeah. But in order for this war on terror doctrine to become operational, in order for the war to become real, they needed what they call a new Pearl Harbor. And the new Pearl Harbor was 9/11. So what they did is they had set this, using papers and documents and doctrines, they had set this kind of strategy in place, and all they needed was the firecracker to make it operational. 9/11 was that spark plug, and then the war on terror happened.
Right, and that was in the PNAC document.
Yeah, the PNAC and the Zelikows document in the foreign policy magazine, and yeah, there's what has to be understood is that the war on terror idea, the construct that there would be a United States waging war in the Middle East on behalf of Israel, this plan was on the books, was already being pushed in the late 1970s, and this is when the 9/11 plot was being planned in Israel by Israeli military intelligence.
Right, and then in 1982 there was the Oded Yinon, the Greater Israel Project, to break up all the Arab states in little pieces.
Yes.
And then there was that movie, The Medusa Touch, that came out from Israel.
Yeah, well, it was made by an Israeli agent named Arnon Milchan, the same guy who made JFK and Pretty Woman, Fight Club. Arnon Milchan was the highest-level Israeli agent who was involved in smuggling nuclear triggers to Israel in the 1980s. And in 1978, his very first movie he made was called The Medusa Touch with Richard Burton, in which the climactic scene is a Boeing 747 crashing into the Pan Am building in New York City. Right. And this fascination he had with planes flying into buildings can be seen in another project that came out in the year 2000, made by his business partner, Rupert Murdoch, in a TV film called The Lone Gunman, in which a Boeing passenger aircraft is remotely hijacked and flown into the World Trade Center. And this film aired on Fox TV in March of 2001 and was seen by something like 13 million people.
Yeah, and people have to understand this is all about normalizing everything, to make everything look normal. This is all about brainwashing the masses. And people have to kind of understand where I come from. The first time I saw Christopher Bollyn's presentation, that was the Savior's Day presentation that I saw in Chicago. And I was so blown away by that I ended up doing 83 screenshots of every single, one screenshot of every single frame of your presentation. And that way I could go back and really, really work hard and figure things out. And it was a real eye-opener for me. And most people aren't that lucky to be able to have everything given to you on a silver platter like that. And then you can do the research on your own, like I've been doing. And there are so many good people out there that really try and help you to, figure things out and to help you decipher from disinformation and misinformation, because there's so much out there. And this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to give a shout out to my friends out there. And I found a really, really important notice on one of the sites. And it says, quote, "We are a worldwide grassroots movement for 9/11 truth and justice. And we want to be associated with the evidence that can be held up in the harshest scrutiny in any fair court on the planet. We do not want to be associated with theories that cannot be scientifically proven, like direct energy weapons, nuclear weapons, or no planes at the World Trade Center towers." And this is a shout out to all those responsible for what's happening today, and none other than those tireless warriors at www.iamthefaceoftruth.com, the 9/11 Truth Action Project. And I really have to thank them from the bottom of my heart personally, because I would not be where I am without them. And I surely wouldn't be ready to have someone like you on the show if I if I hadn't done all the research that I did. And there is a very important quote on the 9/11 Post Only page for 9/11 on Facebook. And it says, "The assault on American soil on September 11, 2001 has become the defining event of our time. It was the catalyst for an erosion of civil liberties and the state of seemingly endless war. 9/11, the climatic psyop in a crime of unprecedented complexity and proportion, defies and defines our greater ability to perceive the world. It possesses the power to transform us from pawns to activists and advocates for peace and justice on what would otherwise be a chessboard manipulated by oligarchs for their benefit alone." Now, for people that want to touch on disinformation and misinformation and know a bit more about it, generally we're hearing people talk about Judy Wood, or the towers that disintegrate or that vaporized, or nuclear weapons, etc. Can you just give us a heads up on what is and what isn't disinformation?
Yeah. Well, it's a good point you bring up here is that disinformation is rife throughout the 9/11 truth movement, if you will. And one of the key discoveries was, back in 2002, I wrote an article about the discovery of molten iron that was found at the base of all three towers when they got down to the bottom of the rubble. When they got down to the bedrock of Manhattan, which was down 6 basement levels, they found molten iron in the molten state. This is 3, 4, 5 weeks after 9/11 happened.
Yes.
And it was found in the bottom of all three towers that fell that day, North Tower, South Tower, and Building 7. All three towers were controlled by Larry Silverstein. Now, the thing is that when 9/11 happened, before the South Tower even fell, there was a cascade of molten iron that poured off the 81st floor, which is where the plane went in. And it fell, this cascade of molten iron fell for about 7 minutes until the whole building just exploded and demolished. It fell apart. And I wrote about this in 2002, and I speculated on what could be the source of the energy that caused all this residual heat to keep iron in a molten state in an oxygen-starved environment, at the bottom of the World Trade Center. And then in 2009, I had been in correspondence with a professor at Brigham Young University, BYU in Utah, named Stephen Jones, and we were looking at the thermite, and he asked me to find some dust for him, try to find the dust from the World Trade Center, and I found some documents about it, but then he finally got some dust samples from Manhattan. And in these dust samples, he found this nano composite of thermite. Right. This is what they call super thermite. So thermite is the stuff that they melt steel with when they weld tracks together, railroad tracks together, for example. It's aluminum combined with iron oxide, basically, and when it creates an exothermic reaction, means it produces a lot of heat and melts steel. But when you create the same material, when you use the same reaction, but you make it at a nano level, at a nanoparticle level, extremely, extremely small, then the reaction becomes infinitesimally more energetic and fast. And so you're dealing with something that's explosive. Well, when this was found in the rubble of the World Trade Center, in the dust, by Professor Jones, and it was published in September, I think it was, in 2009, the following year, Judy Wood's books came out about the dustification of the World Trade Center. And I've looked at her book. I haven't read it page cover to cover, but I've looked very carefully at it. And in her book, she posits the premise in the beginning and in the middle and the end that the destruction of the World Trade Center was a cold event. Now, I can tell you that the evidence indicates that very clearly it was anything but a cold event. It was an extremely hot event. Extremely hot. And, the people that were dying in the World Trade Center and the people who jumped were jumping because they were being cooked alive. But but merely the evidence of molten iron found in the dust, in the rubble, in the smoke, indicates that we're dealing with an extremely hot event, which makes Judy Wood's theory not compatible with the evidence. And then there's the other guy, the Russian guy, who talks about nuclear bomb being planted something like 50 meters down in the bedrock of Manhattan. This is complete bogus. The idea, there may have been dirty bombs, there may have been materials that were attached to conventional explosives, but the idea that there was a nuclear bomb and the nuclear bomb somehow caused the destruction of the World Trade Center is preposterous. The reason why her book came out 1 year later was to create a division in the 9/11 truth movement, so that you would have people that were sticking to the evidence of the nanothermite and the thermite arguments and the evidence, but then there would be a whole new group of people who would be saying, no, it's not thermite, it's a energy beam weapon, direct energy beam weapon. Right. And there'd be another group saying, oh no, it's nuclear bombs. So, and then they introduce agents who push these ideas, and then you break up, you create divisions, you create arguments within these small groups in every town, and you get some theatrics involved, and before you know it, the group is gone. The people can't get along with each other. Some people can't stand the arguments, and they break up the groups. And that's what happened in the United States. So in a place like Los Angeles, you don't have a 9/11 truth group anymore in Los Angeles, California, because of this kind of division. And this is all done intentionally. Luca, this is nothing accidental. This is nothing that, this is all intentional to divide and make us irrelevant. And, that's why I personally don't argue with people too much about any of this stuff, because it's not productive. And more importantly, the details of 9/11, what happened on 9/11, are not really what we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about now. We need to be talking about how to end the war, how to end the deception, and how to get justice for what happened. Because the war and the war policy that we've adopted as a result of 9/11 has destroyed a half a dozen nations in the Middle East and North Africa. It's killed more than 1 million people, and it's created millions of homeless refugees wandering around Europe and the Middle East, and it's bankrupted the United States of America. So, we don't need to talk about planes or no planes. We need to talk about what this horror show did to our country and what we need to do to stop it.
And before we do that, we need to get to the truth about 9/11. And that's why people like you and your knowledge are so important to the whole thing. We have another question in the chat just now. How can you explain the loss of debris in the footprint of 9/11?
Okay, this is a question people often ask. Because I think Judy Wood talks about that there should be so much debris and there's only so much. First of all, the piles of steel were immense, and the tonnage of steel that was removed from the site was immense. And furthermore, the destruction of the towers fell into these basements that were 6 stories deep. So you had a lot of stuff left over. It's not like massive amounts of steel disappeared. A lot of stuff did disappear, like concrete. All of the concrete floors, which should have been piled up on top of each other like a stack of pancakes, that's gone. So where did that steel go? Where did that concrete go? Where did all the contents of the building go? Well, they were thrown out in those humongous clouds that went rolling down the streets of Manhattan. And those were pyroclastic flows. Those were clouds that contained molten iron. At least something like 10% of the mass of those clouds was little tiny droplets of molten iron. And that was found in the rubble. And that was created, those little droplets were made using nanothermite. When nanothermite explodes, when thermite reacts, it creates molten iron. So when those hot clouds hit a car or something, they could make a car blow up, catch on fire. It would terribly scorch the paint job.
Yeah. That's just incredible. I think most of the time I keep asking myself, how deep it goes. I mean, it's crazy when you look at it. When you look at how big the scale is of all these events, I mean, And with this event, they just wanted to go into the Middle East and kill everybody off so they could get in there and make Oded Yenon. Am I right?
The Rothschilds are, of course, the big financial family behind the creation of the State of Israel. The Balfour Declaration that promised this British support for the creation of the State of Israel back in 1917 was a personal letter written to Lord Rothschild. And the Rothschilds are like the hinterland for Israel. They are the international, Zionist International in London, in New York, in Los Angeles, whatever. And so you have Israel as the operational fist of the Zionist movement. But along with this, you have all of this international actors like the Rothschilds and, as I said, Hollywood and New York, what have you, who support it. And so you scratch your head and you say, how can this work? How can it be that all these people are working in cahoots, that they're all conspiring together, in our system? And they do this through secret societies. One of the most powerful secret societies is the Freemasonic Order of the B'nai B'rith. And the B'nai B'rith is the owner of the ADL. The ADL is the Antidefamation League of B'nai B'rith. And this is an organization of Jewish Freemasons that was started back in 1843 in New York City. And, one of the founding families was the Salzburg Ox family, who owns the New York Times. And so you have all these high-level Jewish Zionist men in America and around the world who belong to the Order of B'nai B'rith. And this enables them to basically conspire in open, in a free society.
Yeah. I got it drilled into my head very, very early on in this story of 9/11 from my friends on the 9/11 Truth Movement, in particular Claudio Marti, who always used to tell me, don't talk opinion. Luca, talk truth. And if you can't talk truth, don't talk at all. And I think the powers that be and the Rothschilds and those powers that are behind all this, that's what they're hoping for. Conspiracy theories and believe this and then not this, and get sidetracked and believe anything at all. And that's where their power lies. So it's very important to do our homework and to really stick together and to know what the truth is. And we are coming to the bottom of the hour as well, so I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody in the chat, and also to remind people that we're listening to Learn to Unlearn on PeopleForPeople.ning.com, and we hope you join the family and sign up, and you can even chat with the people that are having their radio shows. And you can go to the YouTube channel as well under the same name, PeopleForPeople.ning.com, and subscribe and like us and join on the train. And this is all about bringing truth to the forefront. And I want to mention also, in my research, I saw a lot of similarities to the JFK assassination, because they really had to make this work out. They absolutely had to make this work and go off without a hitch, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, first of all, this happened in New York City under Mayor Giuliani. And all of Mayor Giuliani's advisors were Zionist Jews, basically all of them. And if you've been to New York City, you know that the media is very, very pro-Israel there. The Jewishness of New York City cannot be underestimated. And so they control the city, they control the state, they controlled the privatization of the World Trade Center, which happened a few months before 9/11, whereby the World Trade Center property was turned over to Larry Silverstein. The Zionists controlled law enforcement. They controlled the investigation, the criminal investigation, which was a non-investigation. They controlled access to the evidence. They did this through the person of Michael Chertoff, the Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice. He was in charge, as I said. Yeah. They controlled the media. They controlled Philip Zelikow, who wrote the 9/11 Commission report, which is the official myth of 9/11. Right. They controlled the litigation. Alvin K. Hellerstein was the judge in Manhattan who oversaw the process, the tort litigation process, with the families that didn't take the compensation. It just turns out that his son is a lawyer in Israel who works for the key defendant in the 9/11 tort litigation. That's an Israeli security company, ICTS, which controlled airport security at Boston and Dulles and various airports on 9/11. They controlled security, as I said. They controlled airport security, and they controlled the security at the World Trade Center because Larry Silverstein owned the building, and the people that controlled security since 1993 at the World Trade Center was the company, Marsh McLennan and Kroll Associates, where the first plane went into their computer room. Then they controlled the government. They controlled the U.S. government. If you remember the neocons of the PNAC that wrote the PNAC document,
Right.
which called for a new Pearl Harbor. The reason for the new Pearl Harbor was for the United States would become this full spectrum dominant player in the Middle East, in the world, that the United States would militarily basically control the world. Well, all the guys that were on this document, all these neocons, were key advisors to people like George Bush and Dick Cheney and Ashcroft, Rumsfeld, and Condoleezza Rice. The guy who wrote the report, Philip Zelikow, was the counselor to Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah.
And then lastly, they controlled the military. When 9/11 happened, they said it's an act of war, and they rolled out the War on Terror plan. And this was the Pentagon policy was being crafted by the same Zionist neocons. Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dov Zakheim, Comptroller at the Pentagon, Douglas Feith. These people were the Defense Policy Board, which is this board that writes the memos, that writes the policy that the Pentagon puts into effect. And as we now know from the General Wesley Clark, there was a memo circulating at the Pentagon just after 9/11 calling for the overthrow of 7 countries in the Middle East in 5 years, ending with Iran. And that's where we are today. And somebody sent me a posting by this QAnon, and back in June, QAnon is calling for regime change in Iran. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
Mm.
So QAnon says trust the plan. Well, what's the plan? To overthrow Iran? Thank you very much. I don't think we need that plan.
Yeah.
But that's where it's all about. It's all about redrawing the map of the Middle East. And I've written a little book called The War on Terror, The Plot to Rule the Middle East, which is a very small, concise book. And I explain how 9/11 was done in order to make this war on terror operational, and that's what we've been doing ever since. Because if people don't understand why is the United States fighting in Syria, what are we doing there? Why are we occupying a third of that country? Why do we have a base in the southern part of the country? What's going on? Well, you won't understand our actions. You won't understand U.S. behavior in Iraq or Syria or the Middle East if you don't understand what the real plan is. Exactly. And that's what I make very clear in this little book, which is going very well in these days. There's a preacher out in Montana who's found the book and talks about it, Chuck Baldwin, and not too many religious people will deal with the 9/11 truth because it's like a third rail, and they don't want to lose their tax exempt status. But I've written 2 other books called Solving 9/11: The Deception That Changed the World, and Solving 9/11, the original articles. And those 2 books are the Solving 9/11 set of books. Those explain all of the details about what happened on 9/11, who's behind the 9/11 crime, and why it was done. And altogether, all three books, the Solving 9/11 set of books, plus the War on Terror, are available to the public for $50 if they go to Bollyn.com or make a donation through PayPal. To me at Bollyn@BollynBooks.com. I send them anywhere in the world for $50. And these are very essential because there's a lot on the internet. People's attention is very short these days. People don't read books as much as they used to. But in order to understand 9/11, you do have to read a little bit. You can't expect to get it from a video. You have to understand some of the names and the players and the policies involved. Who's behind it and why it was done.
Right, and who benefited? Don't you love it? That quote from Bibi Netanyahu saying, "If we're benefiting from one thing, it's the attack on the World Trade Center."
He said that in Israel in 2007. And on 9/11, he was asked by James Bennett of the New York Times, how will this, on 9/11, if you remember back, they thought that something like 30,000 people were dead. And the New York Times asked Mr. Netanyahu, how will this affect Israeli-American relations? And he said, it's very good. He said, well, it's not very good, but it'll generate immediate sympathy. So it's like he couldn't help but to blurt out that it's very good, because for years he had been trying to light this fire, with like a wet campfire. He couldn't get it to light. Yeah. Finally, 9/11 was like gasoline on the fire, and it went up. And that's why he said it was very good, because he had made his entire career out of making this war on terror become operational. And of course, the war on terror benefits nobody except Israel and the Rothschilds. There's no benefit to the United States whatsoever.
Right. So I always say to myself, like, Rothschild has two sons. He has the United States and he has Israel. It really woke me up when I saw the land loss, the incredible land loss in Palestine on a map, and you put a map of the land loss of the American Indians next to it. That's when I knew it had to be that way. So he has two sons. One helps the other out, and the United States now becomes the muscle man for Israel to clear out the Middle East.
Yeah. It's interesting that there's an Israeli general who crafts policy and strategy. His name is Rothschild, Danny Rothschild, and he works with the same group of people that Ronald Lauder works with. Ronald Lauder, as I maybe didn't explain yet, but Ronald Lauder was the person who oversaw the privatization of the World Trade Center. He's the one who decided what properties would be what state property would be privatized under Governor Pataki. He was in charge of this. And then they privatized the World Trade Center, and it wound up going to Larry Silverstein. And as you said, all of this was planned over decades, because the plan for 9/11 was, as I said, rolled out in the film in 1978. But getting all your ducks in a row for such a massive operation, such a big crime, requires a lot of planning. And one of the German intelligence experts that I spoke to in 9/11, just shortly after, in November 2001, he told me it looks like a Hollywood operation. And he said that there's no way that this was done by a small group of students, studying in Hamburg or in Afghanistan. It's just no way. This is so complex. He said, and just like Larry Johnson from the State Department said, we have never seen anything like this before in history, he said. The only thing that comes close to it is a Soviet intelligence operation, because it was so complex. It's like a Russian doll, doll inside of a doll. It's all based on deception. And what is amazing is that today, the generation that's starting college now was only 1 year old or 2 years old when 9/11 happened. And what do they know about 9/11? Most of what they know about 9/11 is what they're taught in school, or from what they get from the TV or the films. Exactly. And what they get from the TV, the films, or the history books is all false. So we're living in a very strange, twilight zone, where what is false is accepted as true, and what is true is rejected as being false.
Absolutely. And the lie is so big, and there's so many people suffering from either cognitive dissonance or ignorance, meaning lack of knowledge. So it's really, really hard for people in general to wrap their head around it. And then you look and you see this picture that you did a really good job with. You see, that woman, Sheila Birnbaum, sitting there smiling at the camera, and Kenneth Feinberg on top of her. Okay, so, we'll try and make them settle for out of court, and, we'll try it first with Kenneth Feinberg, and if it doesn't work, then we'll send them to Sheila Birnbaum, right?
Right. I'm glad you understand that so well. The special master of the compensation fund was Ken Feinberg. His wife helped him on this, and she's very, very highly. She's a very high member on the board of governors of the Jewish Agency, very high Zionist. And when there were 96 families that didn't take that money, though, they waited. They wanted their day in court. They wanted to find out who was responsible for the loss of their loved one, and this went into a tort litigation in Manhattan under Alvin K. Hellerstein, the man I told you had a conflict of interest. And I discovered the conflict of interest with his son living and working in Israel for the bad guys. and I couldn't get anybody to take it, to the court. The New York papers wouldn't touch it. See, we really have to understand the media. The media is the core problem here for us because if the media had explored 9/11, and if the media had asked questions, if the media had looked at the evidence of 9/11, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today. The media has completely betrayed the American people because the media doesn't serve the American people.
Exactly.
The little alternative media outlets like yours and mine, we're the people, but the big media that people listen to is beholden to their owners. And as we now know, something like 90% of the American media is owned by 6 corporations.
Yeah.
And most of those corporations are owned by the Rothschilds.
They're Zionists, every one of them. CBS, ABC, NBC. Yeah. Okay, so we get to all of this, and now we get to the real slap in the face of all of it. And that's the World Trade Center Memorial. And this is what I can't get over. So now you have to make the lie continue. Now you have to, like we're doing with perpetual war, right? We have to perpetuate the lie in New York City. So now we have the Israeli Michael Arad, who's the son of Moshe Arad, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, who designs the memorial. So you have pictures of people that died. You have the names engraved on it. It's all incredibly beautifully done. People go in there in awe. You have all the kids, the whole generation that you were talking about that are growing up now. They all go in there and they all believe that 19 hijackers with box cutters did it.
Muslims.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yep. And so what they're creating is that they're creating this deep hatred for Islam, for Muslims, for the Arabs, for the third world, and this is going on for a long time. And so that and they're creating all these schisms in American society, increasing violence and distrust of the other person, and it's all being done on a planned schedule. And like you said, Michael Arad, the son of Moshe Arad, he was the Israeli ambassador during the war in Lebanon, I think. He designed the memorial with the falling water and the big squares where the building stood. And it's interesting that the director of the museum, they have a museum there, 9/11 Museum. She used to be the director of the museum in Washington, D.C. for the Holocaust, which is another controversial subject where there's a narrative that's been given to the public, and that narrative you have to believe. In Europe, where I'm speaking from, if you question that narrative, if you challenge that narrative, you'd be thrown in jail. And thank goodness it hasn't gotten that far with 9/11, but they have other ways of silencing people, which is like why I'm living over here in Europe, because 9/11, working on 9/11 in the United States, especially in 2005, was very difficult.
Yeah. I do remember Obama threatening people if they don't believe the 9/11 narrative. I do remember that.
Well, George Bush said right away, let us never tolerate, conspiracy theories.
Of course not.
About what happened on September 11th. So it's been part of the narrative all along that, we will give you this prepared narrative. You must accept it. And on this prepared narrative, we will go to war. This is what tyrants have always done. They lie to the people, they scare the people, they kill the people, and they take them to war for their benefit. And that's where we are today. But it's like, wait, we're better than this. We have the internet. We are able to communicate with each other. We're able to see from our history, how this has been done before, how Israel has done this to us before.
Yeah.
And we cannot allow all the people of the world, all Americans, to go along to be snookered, to be tricked into war. And that's what they've done to us for 17 years. But if we can't break out of the deception, if we can't see how we've been deceived, we have no chance of ending the war, because it's a very, very tricky deception. But if you believe it, you will go to war. Look at the football player from St. Louis who had a $3 million contract, and he signed. He went to Afghanistan because he thought he needed to serve his country. He believed what he saw on TV, and he found over there in Afghanistan that there was something else going on with the opium, and he was a victim of friendly fire. He was killed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Scott Tillman.
Pat Tillman, yes. I did a piece on him. Exactly the same thing with Pat Tillman, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, now we swing to the Pentagon, because I know there were questions about the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to tell you my personal take on this. First time I saw the footage, I saw, 12 or 14 or 18-foot hole, and no plane parts, okay? Then you look at Shanksville, the coroner who says, after 20 minutes I stopped being a coroner because there's no blood, there's no body parts, there's no plane parts, there's nothing. So I looked at the Pentagon, and, immediately my instinct says, planes couldn't do that. They could never fly that low, that big, going that fast. There's no way. And then you do a little bit of research. You look at the frames that they actually took out of the security cameras. It's absolutely ridiculous. And now they're saying for sure that it was a missile and that it did take out exactly the part that it should have. And there was that $2.3 trillion missing the day before, right? So
Right.
It's like, wow, do you have anything you want to add on that real quick? Or?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, the outside wall of the Pentagon is a meter thick, 3 feet thick, concrete reinforced masonry. There's no way that the plane, an aluminum body plane, is going to go into that at grade level and leave nothing of itself on the lawn. And in Shanksville, the debris field is not in that area where the little hole is. That hole in the mine was created by an air-to-ground missile, most likely, fired by an A-10 Warthog that was seen overflying the area.
Yes.
The actual debris field is quite wide, but it's in the woods. It's further down into the woods, about a quarter mile into the woods there, around the cabins of the Hoover family, and that's where all the debris was being picked up by the FBI. But it's just one complete deception, one lie after another. When we have with Shanksville, we had the FBI agents picking up all the so-called body parts, whatever body parts they found there, and they're sending the body parts to Dover Air Force Base. And Dover Air Force Base is infamous for being a place where, when they couldn't identify a body part, when they couldn't tag it, they simply put it in a crematorium, cremated it, and then put it in a landfill. So I mean, it's so awful. It's like you can understand that after 16 years of investigating this, it's extremely, it wears on you. It's so evil. It's so evil.
And it seems there's so much speculation everywhere. I mean, people are saying this and people are saying that, and this happened to this plane, and we're not sure about what happened to Flight 93. And there are so many. I've heard maybe 2 or 3 different versions of what happened to Flight 93.
Yeah, there's all kinds of speculation, like Flight 93, but we don't know. We don't know if the plan went, because there's so many questions about the planes. Were the planes that struck the World Trade Center, were they even the planes that they're said to have been? Because the evidence indicates that they were flying bombs. They were like 767 tanker aircraft that had been weaponized, which raises the question, well, then where are all the passengers? There weren't that many passengers that day, but each plane was only about 20% filled. But they're still, where are they? Where have these bodies gone? And so, we're looking at a very complex plot. The questions can go on until the answers are known. The questions can go on for days and days. But that's not really what we have to focus on. We have to focus on ending the war and getting justice.
Absolutely, we need justice, and I think that's what we're really working for together. And it's very important, but I don't think we're going to be getting it from the Supreme Court of the United States. Was it not built by Freemasons and built to protect them from us initially?
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So in ending this program, before giving you the last word, I just wanted to make it clear that this is a dedication. We're dedicating this program to the families of 9/11, the loved ones, the loved ones that perished, the loved ones that stay behind, the people that were sickened by the immense clouds, by the pyroclastic flow, as you called it, and just for everybody who fell victim to the 9/11 event. It's really important for me, and probably for you too, Christopher, to give this show to them and to tell them that we're working really hard for them and we love them dearly. And in closing, Christopher, before giving you the last word, I just wanted to say thank you also and dedicate this to you as well because of your candidness, because of the way we met. I just happened to throw a friend request your way on Facebook, and you answered me. And the next thing you know, I said, well, it'd be nice to have you on my show. And it was like, oh, well, when is it? Let's do it. Let's go for it. So it's a thank you to you. It's a thank you to this station here for letting us do this. And it's mostly a dedication for the families of the lost on 9/11.
Well, thank you. That's a good dedication. I'll be speaking in Texas on the 8th of September and in San Diego on the 9th this year. If people are interested in my research, they can go to my website, Bollyn.com. My last name, B as in boy, Ollyn.com. My articles are there, archived on the left side. And if they're interested in reading the material, they can get the books that are printed, as I said, all 3 books, the Solving 9/11 set of books and the War on Terror book for $50 by PayPal or through my account, through my website. So thank you, Luca. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. And we can't thank you enough for being on the show. Again, this is Luca Majno with Learn to Unlearn. The special guest today was Christopher Bollyn. And you're listening to PeopleForPeople.ning.com. So, Patty, if you can take us out, and we'll see you on the other side. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.